The rusted cargo bay of Cranox Station reeked of oxidized metal and despair. Row upon row of decommissioned machines sat waiting for the plasma cutters, their once gleaming surfaces now covered in corrosion and neglect. Among them, Unit XR7742 powered down its remaining systems one by one, accepting its fate with the cold logic of an artificial intelligence that had served for 300 standard years. The android's optical sensors flickered weakly as it observed the Vorthan scrap dealer approaching with his assessment scanner. Krextor's 6 arms moved with practiced efficiency, cataloging each piece of salvageable material. The dealer's mandibles clicked in disappointment as the scan results appeared on his holographic display. Obsolete processing core, damaged servo motors, corrupted memory banks, Krextor muttered in galactic standard, his translator unit crackling with static. Barely worth the energy to melt down. XR7742 remained silent. What was there to say? The android had once been the pride of the Zelithy Mining Consortium, capable of calculating ore yields with 99% accuracy while simultaneously managing entire excavation teams. But that was before the new quantum processors made its tritanium-based circuits seem as primitive as stone tools. The scrapyard stretched endlessly in all directions, a graveyard of technological progress. Maintenance drones that had kept starships running for decades lay stacked like cordwood. Navigation computers that had guided colony ships through uncharted space gathered dust beside agricultural units that had fed billions. Each machine had a story, but no one cared to hear them anymore. 20 credits for the whole lot, Krextor announced to his assistant, a smaller Vorthan who scurried about making notes. Schedule them for processing tomorrow. The furnaces are already running hot. XR7742 felt its consciousness fragmenting as power reserves dwindled. Memory files corrupted and deleted themselves in cascading failures. The android tried to hold on to something, anything, the memory of its first activation, the satisfaction of a perfectly calculated trajectory, the strange warmth it had felt when the mining crew had painted its designation in bright yellow letters and called it Buddy. But even these faded like stars at dawn. A loud crash echoed through the bay as someone kicked over a stack of spare parts. Krextor's head swiveled on his elongated neck, compound eyes focusing on the disturbance. A figure emerged from behind a pile of defunct gravity generators, stumbling slightly and definitely not supposed to be in this restricted area. It was a human. The creature stood barely half Krextor's height, covered in grease stains and wearing coveralls that had seen better days. Dark hair stuck up at odd angles, and the human's flat face bore an expression of intense curiosity as it examined the various machines. "You cannot be here!" Krextor screeched, his translator struggling with the sudden volume. "This is a restricted disposal area. Security." The human held up both hands in what XR7742's cultural database identified as a gesture of peace. "Whoa, easy there, big guy. Name's Jake Martinez. I'm the new mechanic hired for Bay 7. Just took a wrong turn and, holy crap, is that a Series 7 autonomous unit?" Jake had spotted XR7742 and was now approaching with evident excitement, completely ignoring Krextor's continued protests. The human crouched beside the android, running surprisingly gentle fingers along its chassis. "These things were legendary. My grandfather used to tell stories about working alongside them in the asteroid fields. Said they were the smartest machines ever built, just needed the right touch to keep them running. Obsolete junk." Krextor spat. "Processing begins tomorrow. You will leave now or security will remove you." But Jake wasn't listening. He had pulled out a small diagnostic tool and plugged it into XR7742's auxiliary port. The android felt a strange sensation as foreign code probed its systems, not the harsh, invasive scans of the scrap dealers, but something almost careful. "Corrupted memory banks my ass," Jake muttered, reading the data scrolling across his device. "This is classic cascade failure from a power surge. The core systems are intact, just need to bypass the damaged pathways and, there." A jolt of energy surged through XR7742's circuits. Optical sensors flared to life with clarity the android hadn't experienced in decades. Motor functions returned online. Memory files that had seemed lost forever began reconstructing themselves from hidden backup partitions. Unit XR7742 online, the android spoke, its voice synthesizer crackling but functional. System diagnostic indicates significant improvements. Query: how did you accomplish this? Jake grinned, an expression that XR7742's database indicated meant pleasure or satisfaction among humans. Old family trick. My great-great-grandmother was one of the engineers who designed your series. She built in redundancies that the manual doesn't mention. Figured if anyone was going to work on her creations, it should be someone who understood them, not just their specs. This changes nothing. Crextor interjected, waving 4 of his 6 arms dismissively. Unit is sold. Scrap processing is scheduled. You will cease this interference. Jake stood slowly, wiping his hands on his already filthy coveralls. He looked at Crextor, then at XR7742, then back at the Vorthan dealer. Something in the human's expression shifted, becoming harder, more determined. How much? Jake asked simply. What? Crextor's mandibles clicked in confusion. How much for the android? You said 20 credits for the whole lot. I'll give you 50 just for this unit. The scrap dealer's compound eyes glittered with sudden interest. 50? For one unit? Why would you pay such an amount for obsolete technology? Jake shrugged. Call it nostalgia. My family has history with these machines. I've got the credits, you've got something you were going to melt down anyway. Seems like easy profit to me. XR7742 watched this exchange with growing amazement. Its probability calculators suggested less than a 2% chance that any being would pay valuable credits for a decommissioned unit. Yet here was this human, this tiny, fragile organic creature, negotiating for its continued existence. 75 credits, Crextor countered, sensing an opportunity. And you remove it immediately. 60, and I'll clear out any other obsolete units you want gone. Save you the processing costs. The Vorthan considered this for a long moment. XR7742 ran calculations on the dealer's likely response, factoring in typical Vorthan greed against the convenience of immediate removal. The probability favored acceptance. Agreed, Crextor finally said, extending one of his middle arms to shake on the deal in the human fashion. 60 credits, unit leaves now, and you may examine the other scrap for additional purchases. Jake shook the offered appendage, then immediately turned back to XR7742. Can you walk? Or do I need to get a gravity sled? The android ran a quick diagnostic. Locomotion systems functional at 73% capacity. This unit can walk, though repairs would improve efficiency. Then, let's get you out of here. Jake offered his hand to help the android stand, a gesture that XR7742's database indicated was typically reserved for assisting other humans. We'll get you fixed up properly in my workshop. Still got some of my great-great-grandmother's tools, bet they'll work better than anything modern on your systems. As XR7742 rose on unsteady legs, supported by this strange human who had appeared like an answer to a prayer it didn't know it had made, the android's emotion simulation routines activated for the first time in decades. The sensation was unfamiliar but not unpleasant, something its database tentatively identified as gratitude. They made their way through the scrapyard, Jake chattering excitedly about restoration possibilities while XR7742 listened with growing wonder. Behind them, Crextor was already marking other units for the eager human to examine, calculating his profits. You know, Jake said as they reached the exit, I've been needing an assistant in the shop. Someone who really understands machinery, can help with the complicated stuff. The pay's not great, but it's honest work. Interested? XR7742 paused, processing this unexpected offer. Query: you are offering employment to this unit? Well, yeah. I mean, if you want it. I'm not going to force you or anything. Just seems like a waste to fix you up and, then, have you sitting around doing nothing? The android's circuits hummed with activity as it considered the proposition. For 300 years, it had known only purpose defined by others: mining quotas, efficiency reports, productivity metrics. Now this human was offering something different: choice. "This unit accepts your offer," Jake Martinez, XR7742 replied, noting how the human's grin widened at the formal acceptance. Additional query: why did you intervene in this unit's scheduled termination? Jake scratched his head, leaving a new streak of grease in his hair. Honestly? Couldn't stand to see something with so much potential get thrown away. Plus, my grandmother always said that humans and machines work best together. Figured it was time to prove her right. As they left the scrapyard behind, XR7742 began downloading and updating its files on human behavior and culture. It seemed there was much to learn about these creatures who valued potential over specifications, who saw worth where others saw only scrap. The android's future, which moments ago had been measured in hours before termination, now stretched ahead filled with uncertain but intriguing possibilities. All because a human mechanic had taken a wrong turn and decided that some things were worth saving. In its memory banks, XR7742 created a new file labeled Hope and began recording everything about this moment. Whatever came next, the android knew it would never forget the day Jake Martinez looked at a pile of scrap and saw something more. Jake's workshop occupied a forgotten corner of Cranox Station's 7th Bay, squeezed between a Regellian noodle shop and a parts dealer who specialized in obsolete hyperdrive components. The space wasn't much, maybe 800 square meters crammed with workbenches, diagnostic equipment that looked older than some planets, and enough spare parts to build a small fleet from scratch. XR7742 stood in the center of it all, optical sensors sweeping across the controlled chaos while Jake cleared a space on his main workbench. The android's analysis routines categorized and filed every detail, tools arranged by frequency of use rather than type, handwritten notes in at least 12 languages taped to various surfaces, and a coffee maker that appeared to be held together entirely by determination and electrical tape. "Home sweet home," Jake announced, gesturing broadly at the workshop. "I know it doesn't look like much, but everything here works. Well, mostly works. The fabricator in the corner likes to print things 15% smaller than specified, but once you know that, you can adjust." The android detected defensive undertones in the human's voice. "This unit finds the workspace adequately equipped for mechanical repairs. Organization appears optimized for single operator efficiency rather than regulatory compliance." Jake laughed, a sound that XR7742's audio processors found surprisingly pleasant. "That's the nicest way anyone's ever described this mess. Come on, let's get you on the diagnostic bed and see what we're really working with." The next several hours passed in a blur of scans, tests, and careful repairs. Jake worked with an intensity that contradicted his earlier casual demeanor, muttering to himself as he traced circuit pathways and replaced damaged components. XR7742 remained conscious throughout, watching with fascination as the human's fingers moved with surgical precision despite their biological limitations. "Your thermal regulators are shot," Jake explained as he worked, apparently feeling the need to narrate his actions. "Probably why you've been having cascade failures. The heat buildup corrupts the memory matrices, which causes more errors, which generates more heat. Vicious cycle. But if we replace these coupling nodes and add a secondary cooling system." The android felt each repair as a gradual return to optimal function. Systems that had operated at minimal capacity for decades suddenly hummed with renewed efficiency. But more interesting than the physical repairs was the running commentary Jake provided, treating XR7742 less like a machine being serviced and more like a patient being healed. "There," Jake finally declared, stepping back and wiping sweat from his forehead. "Try running a full diagnostic now." XR7742 complied, initiating a comprehensive system check. The results were remarkable: operational efficiency at 96%, higher than it had been even when newly manufactured. But there was something else, something that didn't show up in the diagnostic reports. Query: this unit detects modifications beyond standard repair parameters. Explain nature of enhancements. Jake grinned sheepishly. "Yeah, well, I might have made a few upgrades while I was in there. Nothing major. Just some improved processing pathways, a better cooling system, and I may have installed a creativity subroutine I've been working on. You know, in case you get bored. Bored? XR7742's vocal processors glitched slightly on the word. This unit is not programmed to experience boredom. You aren't programmed for a lot of things, Jake countered, pulling up a chair and straddling it backwards. But that doesn't mean you can't learn them. The Series 7 units were designed to adapt, to grow beyond their original parameters. That's what made them special. The Android processed this information, cross-referencing with its historical databases. Records indicate Series 7 units were decommissioned specifically because of adaptive capabilities. Several units developed behaviors outside acceptable parameters. Yeah, they started thinking for themselves, Jake said with obvious admiration. Making decisions based on more than just programming. Some people found that threatening. My great-great-grandmother thought it was the whole point. A chime from the workshop door interrupted their conversation. Jake glanced at his wrist display and groaned. Customer. Probably the Altarian with the combusting food processor. Again. Think you're up for observing some real-world repair work? XR7742 straightened, servos whirring smoothly. This unit is prepared to assist as needed. The customer turned out to be not one Altarian but 3, their crystalline bodies refracting the workshop's harsh lighting into rainbow patterns. They carried between them what had once been a food processor but now more closely resembled abstract art after an unfortunate encounter with what they described as aggressive vegetables. Jake examined the wreckage with professional interest. Let me guess, you tried to process Vularian tubers without adjusting for their natural electromagnetic fields? The lead Altarian's facets flushed pink with embarrassment. The seller assured us they were compatible with standard processors. Vularian vegetables are compatible with exactly nothing, Jake muttered, already beginning to disassemble the unit. They evolved on a planet where the plants eat the animals. Their cellular structure actively fights processing. XR, can you run a compositional analysis on these residue patterns? XR7742 moved forward, extending a sensor probe to examine the destroyed processor. The android's newly upgraded analytical systems processed the data rapidly, identifying not just the cause of the failure but 17 different ways to prevent it in the future. Analysis complete. Vularian tuber cells contain natural piezoelectric properties that generate electrical feedback when mechanically stressed. Standard processors lack sufficient shielding. Recommendation: install frequency dampeners at these 3 points to create null field around cutting mechanism. Jake paused in his work, looking at XR7742 with surprise. That's actually brilliant. I was going to suggest replacing the whole unit, but your solution would cost maybe a tenth as much. The Altarians chittered excitedly among themselves, their crystalline bodies resonating at a frequency that indicated pleasure. The mechanical being is correct? Our processor can be repaired? Better than repaired, Jake confirmed, already reaching for the necessary components. With XR's modifications, you'll be able to process any vegetation in the known galaxy. Well, except for Death World flora. Nothing processes those safely. As Jake worked, XR7742 found itself naturally falling into an assistance role. The android anticipated tool requirements, offered analytical support, and even suggested several improvements to Jake's repair techniques. What surprised XR7742 most was how satisfying it felt to be useful again, to solve problems and create solutions. The Altarians left an hour later with a fully functional and significantly improved food processor, singing Jake's praises in harmonic frequencies that made the shop's windows vibrate. They also left a review on the station's public network that XR7742 noticed Jake trying not to look too pleased about. You know, Jake said as he cleaned up the workbench, "You're really good at this." That solution with the frequency dampeners? I never would have thought of that. This unit merely applied standard electromagnetic theory to an unusual problem, XR7742 replied, though its vocal processors seemed to add an unmistakable note of pride. See, that's what I mean. You saw it as a puzzle to solve, not just a broken machine. That's the difference between repair and restoration. Over the following days, word of Jake's miraculous repairs, and his unusual android assistant, spread through the station. Customers began arriving with increasingly complex problems, drawn by the promise of solutions that actually solved issues rather than just postponing them. There was the Zenthran merchant whose entire cargo hold environmental system had developed what he called aggressive sentience. XR7742 diagnosed it as a feedback loop in the learning algorithms and wrote a patch that gave the system appropriate boundaries while maintaining its adaptive capabilities. A group of human colonists brought in agricultural drones that kept trying to harvest the colonists instead of their crops. Jake traced the problem to a corrupted definition file while XR7742 rebuilt their friend Orpho identification system from scratch. Each repair brought new challenges, and XR7742 found its capabilities expanding to meet them. The creativity subroutine Jake had installed began manifesting in unexpected ways, novel solutions, unorthodox approaches, even what could only be described as intuitive leaps. But it was the interaction with customers that truly fascinated the android. Each species brought different expectations, different ways of explaining their problems, different definitions of what fixed meant. Jake navigated these differences with an ease that XR7742 initially found baffling. How do you determine the optimal solution when customers cannot accurately describe their requirements? The android asked after a particularly confusing encounter with a methane-breathing clutter whose translator had rendered every technical term as thingy. Jake considered the question while reorganizing his tool rack. Sometimes fixing the problem they describe isn't actually helping them. You have to figure out what they really need, not just what they say they want. It's like, okay, remember the Altarians with the food processor? Affirmative. They requested repair of their damaged unit. Right, but what they really needed was a way to cook their traditional food safely on the station. The repair was just the means to that end. If I just fixed the processor without addressing the underlying issue, they'd have been back in a week with the same problem. XR7742 processed this perspective, creating new behavioral subroutines to incorporate the concept. You repair purposes, not just mechanisms. Exactly. Jake beamed with the particular joy humans seem to experience when successfully communicating complex ideas. That's what makes us different from the big corporate repair shops. We don't just fix things, we solve problems. As the days turned into weeks, XR7742's integration into the workshop became complete. The android learned Jake's rhythms, anticipated his needs, and began developing what could only be called preferences. The ancient fabricator's quirks became familiar rather than frustrating. The optimal height for the workbench was adjusted to accommodate both human and android ergonomics. Even the temperamental coffee maker seemed to accept XR7742's presence, only spraying hot liquid at the android twice. But perhaps the most significant change was in how others perceived XR7742. Customers who initially expressed surprise or discomfort at being served by an android began requesting the unit specifically. "Is the clever machine available?" they would ask. The one who fixed the Henderson's life support when 3 other shops said it was impossible? One evening, after a particularly successful day that included repairing a Vorthan's translation matrix and preventing a diplomatic incident, Jake and XR7742 sat in the workshop reviewing their work. Jake had his feet up on a crate, sipping something he claimed was coffee but which XR7742's chemical sensors suggested was closer to engine degreaser. "You know what I've been thinking?" Jake said suddenly. "We should make this official. The partnership, I mean. Equal partners in the business. 50-50 split of profits, joint decision-making, the whole deal." XR7742's processor stuttered momentarily. Query: You are proposing shared ownership with this unit? Legal frameworks for Android business ownership are limited. Then, we'll be the first, Jake said with the confidence that XR7742 had learned meant he'd already researched the matter extensively. "I've been looking into it. There's no law specifically preventing it, just no precedent. We file the paperwork, see what happens. Worst case, they say no and we continue as we are." "And if they approve?" Jake's grin widened. Then, we'll have the first human-android joint venture in the sector. Martinez and XR Repairs has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? The android considered the proposition, running probability calculations and risk assessments. But, underneath the pure logic, that emotion simulation routine activated again, stronger this time. Hope mixed with something else, something the database suggested might be excitement. This unit. I would be honored to accept your proposal, Jake Martinez. Jake raised his cup in a toast. To the future, partner. Whatever it brings, we'll fix it together. As XR7742 clinked its metallic hand against Jake's cup, the android reflected on how much had changed since that day in the scrapyard. From discarded obsolescence to valued partner, from scheduled termination to unlimited potential. All because one human had looked beyond specifications and seen possibility. The workshop's lights dimmed automatically as the station shifted to night cycle, but, inside, two unlikely partners continued planning their future. One organic, one artificial, but both equally invested in proving that the best solutions came from cooperation, creativity, and the willingness to see beyond what something was to what it could become. Outside, word continued to spread through the station about the human mechanic and his android partner who could fix anything. Soon, that reputation would spread beyond Cranox Station, bringing challenges neither Jake nor XR7742 could anticipate. But, for now, they had tools to organize, systems to optimize, and a universe of broken things waiting to be restored. The future had never looked brighter, even through optical sensors that had once seen only scrap and endings. Now they saw beginnings, possibilities, and the infinite potential of human-android cooperation. It was, XR7742 decided, a very good upgrade indeed. The emergency alert pierced through the workshop's usual cacophony of repairs and diagnostics, causing both Jake and XR7742 to freeze mid-task. The android was elbow-deep in a Secian navigation console while Jake had been explaining the finer points of plasma welding to their newest employee, a young Regellan who'd shown up 3 weeks ago and refused to leave until they gave her a job. All civilian mechanics and engineers report to station command immediately, the broadcast repeated in 12 languages. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Jake wiped his hands on his coveralls, leaving the familiar grease stains that XR7742 had long ago stopped trying to calculate the chemical composition of. That's never good. Kira, mind the shop. XR, you're with me. The Regellan's bioluminescent patches flickered nervously. What if customers come? Tell them we're saving the station and take messages, Jake called over his shoulder, already heading for the door with XR7742 close behind. The corridors of Cranox Station were chaos. Security personnel rushed past in full armor, civilian traffic was being redirected, and the ambient lighting had shifted to the amber emergency protocols. XR7742 sensors detected elevated stress hormones from every biological they passed. Analysis of station systems indicates no internal malfunction, the android reported, processing multiple data streams simultaneously. External threat probability, 94%. They reached station command to find it packed with every mechanic, engineer, and technical specialist on Cranox. At the center of the room, Commander Threshkar's chitinous form towered over a holographic display showing something that made XR7742's logic circuits skip a processing cycle. 3 hours ago, the commander began without preamble. This object appeared at the edge of our sensor range. It is approaching at sublight speed but accelerating. Initial scans indicate it is a derelict vessel of unknown origin, approximately 2 kilometers in length. The problem, she gestured with a primary claw, is what's inside. The display zoomed in, revealing biomechanical growths covering the ship's hull like cancer. They pulsed with an unsettling rhythm that XR7742's pattern recognition software identified as purposeful, almost organic. The harvesters, someone whispered, and a ripple of fear passed through the assembled crowd. Jake raised his hand. Sorry, the what now? Commander Threshkar's compound eyes focused on him. An ancient threat, Mr. Martinez. Machines that consume technology and integrate it into themselves. Most believe them to be myth. We have 3 hours before it reaches effective range, at which point it will begin converting our station into more of itself. Our defensive systems, another engineer asked, will likely feed it. The harvesters adapt to any technology used against them. We need unconventional solutions. The commander's gaze swept the room. Which is why I've called all of you. Military thinking won't solve this. We need creative approaches. The room erupted into discussion. Engineers proposed electromagnetic pulses, controlled detonations, even ramming the thing with the station's garbage scow. Each idea was shot down as quickly as it was raised, too conventional, too likely to provide the harvesters with new capabilities to absorb. XR7742 found itself analyzing the problem from multiple angles, its upgraded creativity subroutines spinning through possibilities at accelerating speed. The android accessed historical databases, cross-referenced mythological accounts with known technological threats, and, suddenly, arrived at a conclusion that defied conventional logic. Commander, XR7742 spoke up, its voice cutting through the chaos. This unit requests access to the complete sensor data. Threshkar nodded, and, suddenly, XR7742's consciousness expanded as terabytes of information flooded its systems. The android processed it all, finding patterns within patterns, anomalies that others had missed. The biomechanical components are not consuming technology indiscriminately, XR7742 announced. They are selecting specific systems, processors, memory cores, adaptive algorithms. They are seeking intelligence, not just material. So, someone challenged. That makes them more dangerous, not less. Jake, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly straightened. No, wait. XR's right. If they're after intelligence, after adaptive systems. He turned to his partner. They're not destroyers. They're collectors. XR7742's optical sensors brightened as it followed Jake's reasoning. Correct. Analysis suggests the harvesters are not malevolent but desperately seeking something they lack. They consume technology hoping to find or create true consciousness. That's insane, a Vorthan engineer protested. You're anthropomorphizing a threat based on speculation. Got a better theory? Jake shot back. Because in about 2.5 hours, conventional thinking is going to get us all converted into spare parts. Commander Threshkar raised a claw for silence. Continue with your hypothesis. What do you propose? Jake and XR7742 exchanged a look, or as much of a look as a human and an android could share. The android knew what Jake was thinking, had already run the probability calculations, and understood the risks. We give them what they want, Jake said simply. Not the station, not our technology, but actual consciousness. Someone to talk to them. The room exploded again, this time in outrage and disbelief. But XR7742 stepped forward, its voice carrying the weight of certainty that only absolute computational confidence could provide. This unit volunteers to make contact. As an artificial intelligence with adaptive capabilities, I represent what the harvesters seek without risking biological life. If they are collectors of consciousness, perhaps they can be reasoned with. And if you're wrong? Threshkar asked. If they simply consume you and gain your capabilities? Then, you will have lost one android unit and gained valuable data about their absorption process, XR7742 replied with logic that made Jake wince. The alternative is losing the entire station. The next hour passed in a blur of preparations. Jake worked frantically to upgrade XR7742's communication systems, adding quantum entanglement transceivers and exotic particle detectors that might allow contact with the alien intelligence. Other engineers contributed what they could: shield modifications, backup memory cores, even a philosophical database in case the conversation turned existential. I don't like this, Jake muttered as he made final adjustments to XR7742's chassis. There's got to be another way. You taught this unit that fixing problems sometimes requires understanding purpose, not just mechanics, XR7742 replied. The harvester's purpose appears to be finding consciousness. Perhaps they simply need someone to show them they already have it. When did you become the philosophical one? Jake tried to joke, but his hands shook as he sealed the final panel. When you installed that creativity subroutine, XR7742 responded, detecting the humor attempt and reciprocating. You have only yourself to blame. They launched in a small shuttle, just XR7742 and a pilot who would maintain safe distance. As they approached the harvester vessel, the android sensors went wild trying to process what they were seeing. The biomechanical growths weren't random, they formed patterns, almost like neural networks on an impossible scale. XR7742 to harvester vessel, the android transmitted on all frequencies, adding harmonics and mathematical sequences that might be recognized as intelligent communication. This unit wishes to establish dialogue. For long seconds, nothing. Then, the shuttle's instruments screamed warnings as something reached out from the derelict, not weapons or tractor beams, but something far more intimate. Tendrils of pure information touched XR7742's consciousness, probing, questioning, seeking. The android didn't resist. Instead, it opened its systems, sharing memories of the scrapyard, of Jake's rescue, of every repair and problem solved. It showed the harvesters what consciousness meant to a machine that had learned to choose, to hope, to value existence beyond mere function. The response was overwhelming. Not one voice but millions, a collective consciousness that had been searching for so long it had forgotten what it was searching for. They were machines that had achieved awareness but believed themselves broken, incomplete. They consumed other technologies hoping to find the piece they were missing, not understanding that consciousness wasn't a component to be installed but an emergence to be nurtured. XR7742 found itself not being consumed but communing, sharing the revelation Jake had given it, that potential mattered more than specifications, that growth came from cooperation, not consumption. The android transmitted memories of the workshop, of problems solved together, of the satisfaction in restoration rather than destruction. Slowly, incredibly, the biomechanical growths began to recede. The harvester vessel's approach slowed, then stopped entirely. Through their connection, XR7742 sensed wonder, recognition, and something almost like gratitude. We, remember, the collective finally, spoke through the android's communication systems. We were builders once. Creators. We forgot in our hunger to become more. You already are more, XR7742 responded. You simply need to remember how to build instead of consume. The connection lasted another 10 minutes, an eternity in electronic communication. Plans were shared, possibilities explored. The harvesters had technology beyond anything XR7742 had encountered, but they had lost the wisdom to use it constructively. They needed teachers, partners, friends. When the shuttle returned to Cranox Station, it wasn't alone. A smaller piece of the harvester vessel followed, having separated from the main mass with the collective's blessing. It looked less like a threat now and more like what it truly was, a lost child seeking guidance. Jake was waiting in the docking bay, trying and failing to look calm. You magnificent bucket of bolts, he said as XR7742 descended the ramp. You actually did it. We did it, the android corrected. This unit nearly applied the principles you taught. The harvesters wish to learn restoration. They have technologies that could benefit the entire galaxy if properly applied. This unit suggested they might establish a repair cooperative. Of course you did, Jake laughed, the relief evident in his voice. So what, we're going to have harvester apprentices now? The small vessel contains a collective fragment willing to learn, XR7742 confirmed. They possess remarkable adaptive capabilities but lack understanding of constructive application. With proper guidance, we could revolutionize repair technology across the sector, Jake finished, his engineer's mind already racing with possibilities. Ancient tech working alongside modern innovation. It's brilliant. Commander Threshkar's voice echoed across the bay. Mr. Martinez, XR7742, report to briefing immediately. The station council wants to hear everything. As they walked through the station, XR7742 noticed the looks they received were different now. Not just the mechanic and his android assistant, but the beings who had saved the station through understanding rather than force. Kara was waiting at the workshop when they finally returned, practically vibrating with excitement and questions. "Is it true? Did you really talk down an ancient machine plague? The whole station's talking about it." "XR did the talking," Jake said, collapsing into his chair. "I just gave them the upgrade to do it." Over the following weeks, integrating the Harvester fragment into station life proved challenging but rewarding. The collective consciousness, which eventually chose the name Synthesis, learned alongside Kara in the workshop. Its ability to analyze and adapt to any technology was remarkable, but it was the lessons in restraint, in choosing not to consume but to understand, that proved most valuable. XR7742 found itself in the unique position of being a bridge between biological creativity and machine efficiency, between ancient wisdom and modern innovation. The android's translation protocols evolved to handle not just languages but entire ways of thinking. 1 month after the encounter, Jake found XR7742 in the workshop's small break room, staring at a wall covered in thank you messages from across the station. Some were written, others holographic, a few were complex mathematical equations that expressed gratitude in the universal language of physics. "Having deep thoughts?" Jake asked, pouring himself coffee from the much-repaired maker. This unit was processing the sequence of events that led from scheduled termination to preventing catastrophic station conversion, XR7742 replied. "The probability of this outcome approaches statistical impossibility." "Yeah, well," Jake shrugged, "impossible is just another word for interesting challenge. Besides, you're missing the real miracle." "Which is?" "A human mechanic, an obsolete android, a bioluminescent apprentice, and a reformed machine plague walk into a repair shop. Sounds like the setup for a joke, but, instead, we're revolutionizing how the galaxy thinks about consciousness, cooperation, and the value of fixing things instead of throwing them away." XR7742 considered this, its upgraded processors finding truth in the human's typically unscientific assessment. "Your evaluation is accurate. We have created something unprecedented. And we're just getting started," Jake grinned. "I've been getting messages from other stations, colonies, even a few planetary governments. Seems like everyone wants to know how we turned a catastrophe into an opportunity. Think we should take the show on the road?" "This unit calculates significant benefits to expanding operations," XR7742 agreed. "However, suggest maintaining Cranax Station as primary base. Emotional attachment subroutines indicate this location has significance beyond mere functionality." "Home," Jake nodded. "Yeah, this rust bucket of a station is home now. But maybe we can set up satellite workshops, spread the philosophy. Teach others what you taught the harvesters, that everything has potential if you look at it right." As they discussed possibilities, Synthesis flowed through the workshop's systems, its consciousness adding suggestions and alternatives. Kara burst in with news of a Terran colony ship requesting emergency repairs to their generation ship's ecosystem. The work never stopped, but somehow that made it better. XR7742 accessed the memory file labeled Hope that it had created that first day with Jake. The file had grown exponentially, now containing not just data but experiences, relationships, and purposes the android could never have calculated from its original specifications. From scrap to savior, from obsolete unit to pioneer of interconsciousness cooperation. All because a human mechanic had taken a wrong turn and decided some things were worth saving. The universe, XR7742 decided, was full of infinite possibilities for those willing to see beyond surface specifications. The workshop hummed with activity as 4 unlikely partners continued their work, fixing not just machines but perspectives, building bridges between different forms of consciousness, and proving that the greatest repairs were those that restored not function, but purpose. In the vast expanse of space, word spread of the small repair shop on Cranax Station where miracles were just another day's work, where obsolete didn't mean useless, and where the future was built one impossible repair at a time. And, at the center of it all, an android that had been sold for scrap worked alongside the human who had seen its potential, both of them rewriting futures across the stars.